Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Richard and welcome back to the Stock Market Outlook video sponsored by MarketSmith. And this week certainly ended poorly for most stocks and of course the major indexes. Here we're taking a look at the Nasdaq composite, basically finishing the week right at the lows but still above a rising 21 EMA. So this line right here is very critical. I want to see us stay above this line and maybe have an undercut, then reclaim sometime next week. That would mean that the uptrend is still intact. But if we do break this line on volume, most likely we are revisiting the 50 SMA. Moving on to the S&P 500, this looks very similar, also fishing right at the lows here. This one has already broken the 21 EMA, but you can see in the past, it's not really within its character to hold that line, and instead the 50-day SMA is really the critical level on this index. Taking a look at growth stocks in general, the FFTY, the Innovator IBD 50 ETF, you can see last week we finished very extended. And basically at this point, we're just kind of holding near this pivot, although once again, we finished pretty much right at the lows this week, although staying above this swing low. So as long as we stay above this level, once again, the uptrend on this stock or this ETF is intact. And at this moment, we're still above a rising 21 EMA, moving out the right-hand side of this base. But at this moment, it is a little bit of a failed breakout. So this should be watched very carefully. And we'll see if we hold up here and continue to trend or just kind of pull back right to this key moving average. But I do think that we've now had a significant move above these pivots around 46 or so, and holding 48.22 and the 21 EMA would definitely be a positive next week and within the next few weeks after that as well. Taking a look at small caps, let's take a look at the Russell 2000 ETF. This is still basing and it pulled back below the 225.21 pivot. Once again, a negative, fishing right at the week's low, but holding pretty close to the 50 SMA, but back below the rising 21 EMA. So this is once again just kind of basing. And if we lose the 50 SMA, the 200 SMA could be in order. And taking a look at the IWS small cap growth, you can see we're also below the 305.72 pivot here. And we are holding barely above the 50 and 200 SMA, it looks like, and the 300 level. But if we do break those points right here, I think a logical spot would be the 283 mark at this point. And this is still just kind of basing, going sideways. And a lot of growth stocks did get hit late this week. So overall, next week is pretty critical. If we hold these spots, the 50 SMA on the SPY, the 21 EMA on the Nasdaq, the uptrend could certainly be intact and just base for a few days and then take off again. But if we break those key levels, especially with the growth stock leaders, that could basically mark the start of a potential correction. So all in all, we don't have to predict what's going to happen. All we have to do is analyze what's actually happening right in the moment and basically react based on our trading rules. That's the best way to do it. Checking in on some growth stock leaders, let's take a look at UPST. This was pretty much going vertical here and did have a downside reversal on this Friday. This is pretty normal. It was very vertical, but if you're trading this pretty actively, it might be time to take some off the table if it breaks these lows right here to basically preserve a nice gain from this pivot. Also taking a look at DLO, a recent earnings gap up. This is actually holding up above the 21 EMA, did have a downside reversal on Friday on reasonably high volume, above average. So you want to see it hold above the swing low as well as the 21 EMA right at this point. And Snap, another stock I like to check in on, is pretty much still going sideways, holding that 21 EMA. Downside reversal today on Friday, but overall I like how this is setting up. A lot of pivots to the upside, but if it does lose the 21 EMA and these lows on volume, it could be revisiting the 50 SMA or this prior 70 level. So you have to be prepared for anything and make sure you know your spots and are managing your risk. Lastly, the clear standout this week was AFRM, Affirm Holdings Inc., which had another gap up, this time on earnings. A great revenue beat, I believe, across the board. I believe active merchants also increased 400% or something crazy like that. And Ray and I actually just put out a video on my channel analyzing the stock all the way from its IPO. So if you want a really in-depth technical analysis of this stock, I'll have the link popping up right now, as well as linked down below in the description. But this is very promising, high closing range, very high volume, the highest volume ever. And it looks like this is moving up the right-hand side of basically its institutional due diligence phase. And just because it had a really strong closing range, that means that it's really outperforming the market and showing a lot of relative strength and basically ignoring the general market weakness. So that is AFRM, and that's a brief run through of the indexes. Once again, we had some pullbacks and we basically ended the week at the lows, and really we have to hold here or we could be in for a correction. But as always, we just have to be prepared for anything, and that's really my goal with this video. We'll talk about the market indexes, leading stocks, my previous watch list, then we'll move on to Cement, the IBD Big Picture article, and finally the GMI Signal from richardlmoglen.com. So if you do enjoy my analysis, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And let's move on and talk about the market indexes. So sorting by the weekly change, AFRM was the clear leader, up 31% from the week's open. And it looks very strong, high closing range on the highest volume ever. That's what this black dot shows right here and indicates. But if the market continues to pull back, I have no doubt that this will consolidate and maybe even fill this gap right here. So we have to always be careful in managing risk, and the overall market really trumps all in terms of executing trades. But this will be basically on my focus list going forward to see if there's a spot to enter if the overall market continues on with the uptrend. Moderna also acted really nicely this week, strong breakout and move on this day right here, Friday, and that continued on this week, strong moves and basically pulling back today on declining volume, but this is a downside reversal, but a nice inside day and up on this Thursday. Moving on, we've got Dash, also a strong move from this breakout and a little bit of a changing character. This has been a tough one to trade. I've tried it a few times here, but finally this time it worked. And even though the market was pulling back, you can see that this is showing RS. Look at the RS line, a nice move upwards towards basically relative strength, new highs for the first time in quite a while. Not quite as high as this, but within this base RS new high. So this looks pretty strong. Nice move on volume as well, and pretty good closing ranges all the 4 days this week. UPST also strong moves, downside reversal today on high volume, but holding that 10-day simple. But if you are a short-term trader, these lows are definitely levels to watch, as well as the overall 250 level, which pretty much lines up with the 10-day simple. Roblox also a strong bullish outside day on this Thursday. Fall through on high volume, got knocked down by the overall market, but showing a little bit of RS, as you can see from the RS line. So this indicator, the relative strength line, definitely key to watch when the overall market is pulling back. If your stock is showing an increasing RS line, that means it's outperforming relative to all other stocks in the market. Moving on, we've got BNTX, not quite as strong as Moderna, still below this anchored VWAP from these highs, but back above the 21 EMA. So this could be setting up for next week, down at the bottom of this base after a very strong move up a few months ago. ASAN following through nicely here. You do have a little bit of a squat, but held Thursday's close here, but I might expect some short-term weakness after this pretty poor close on high volume. LSPD also moving up nicely. I like the 3-bar break and 2-2 reversal on this Thursday, but like many stocks on this list, downside reversal here. And just taking a moment, I want to open this up, and you can see that there's a lot of red creeping in, especially at the bottom of this list, which usually means that there's kind of general weakness within the market leaders, but you do have some new highs still continuing on near the top of this list. So moving on, we've got Crocs, nice move off the 50-day, 10-week area here, retaking the 21 EMA on this day, and strong push up. And even though it did have a significant move off the highs here, relatively, you can see it's outperforming the S&P 500. Docs also holding the 10-day simple and the anchored VWAP from these levels here, looks pretty good, but you do have a little bit of downside reversal action on this Friday. You also holding the 10-day simple, but once again, not the greatest close on this Friday. Dexcom holding the 10-day simple, looks pretty good. App, really strong move on volume here, and a good closing range as well. Relative strength line is increasing, looks pretty good. And this is definitely one to watch next week to see if it can hold this pivot and maybe open in this wick here and push out on volume. Tesla, downside reversal here and breaking all these lows in one bar on reasonably high volume, not above average, but above the prior day's session, and breaking the 10-day simple as well. So this was a nice kicker candle, but this bar kind of gave it all back and more. GNRC, downside reversal today, holding the 10-day simple. However, DDOG lost a 10-day here. Nice push, bullish outside day on this Wednesday, but not great action today, although on decreasing volume. CMG, also negative action here, losing the 10-day simple, although it hasn't really been respecting that key moving average. but it is holding above the 21 EMA, which it hasn't broken since this earnings gap up. Team holding the 10-day, but once again, a little bit of a squat on this Friday. SPT also holding the 10-day here. Really nice trend going on at this moment. Snap also pretty much going sideways above the 21 EMA. A little bit of a downside reversal on this Friday. Can't hold above that anchored VWAP, but there are a bunch of pivots up here if it decides to break out to the upside, but we'll have to wait and see. NVIDIA acting pretty well, holding up nicely, especially today, showing some relative strength, as you can see from the RS line here. FIGS also showing some strength here, bullish outside day on very high volume. Looks pretty good going into next week. We'll see if this falls through. Fiverr, just basically right at this level here, right where I have this line drawn, and downside reversal today, back below the 21 and 10-day simple. PLTR, also a little bit of a fade here, inside day yesterday, inside day and up, but it is holding the 10-day simple despite this squat late in the session. Net acting pretty well, just pulling back into the 10-day on declining volume, but not the greatest close on this Friday. LC also a bearish outside day here and finishing right at the lows, but holding above the 21 EMA at this point. AMD inside day and down, doesn't look great. Maybe a revisit of these lows, or the 50-day simple is in order right near 100. Shop also looks like it's a 2-2 reversal to the downside, breaking below the prior day's low, although not on reasonably high volume. Roku also finishing right at the lows of the day, doesn't look great, below all the key moving averages at this point. Bill also an inside day and down, and not able to hold the 10-day simple or the high volume close, so we'll have to see where this finds support, maybe around 270 or so. CrowdStrike below the 21 EMA, holding above the 50-day at this point, but once again, not the greatest close, although this decline the past 4 days has been on below average volume. Twilio, you can see finishing at the lows of the week pretty much. This one doesn't look great. I'll probably take this off this list right here. EMPH as well, breaking below all the key moving averages. This will be deleted from the list as well. Zscaler bearish outside day, so maybe the start of a downtrend, maybe pulling back to the top of this prior base near 250 or so. Domo also just trending down. This will be off the list as well. SQ breaking the 50-day on volume, definitely a character change here, breaking below these lows on this Tuesday. S also a bearish outside day on this Thursday, and then on this Friday we had an inside day. However, it's still holding above the 21 EMA at this point. And moving on, we've got DLO holding up reasonably well above the 21 EMA, as I mentioned, and this prior swing low. Moving on, we've got SC, and this finished pretty well off the highs today on this Friday, and started the week with a downside reversal, which led to this decline, but is holding above the 21 EMA at this point. DocuSign, I was stopped out of this stock here for a profit around 303. I entered on the 2-2 reversal and 3-hour break to the upside through these highs, but I did have to cut my position at a small gain right here. But doesn't look great below the short-term moving averages, still above a rising 200 SMA, but there's a lot of space here, so I would expect it to find support maybe around 270 or so. Olo also pulling back below the key moving averages, very high volume on this upside reversal, so we'll have to see whether it holds above this low at this point. And lastly, we've got GLBE, which is pulling back into the 50 SMA and the confluence with the high of this prior base. So overall, pretty mixed action. Many of these stocks pulled back pretty sharply off their highs today and did pull back this week. But some stocks like Moderna, AFRM, Dash are showing a lot of strength in this tape, and those are the ones you really want to be focused on when the overall market resumes the uptrend. So moving on, let's take a look at my focus list from this past week and sort by that weekly change and go through the charts. First up, we've got AFRM. We already talked about it. Dash as well. We covered these. We covered as well. BLD tried to break out. Didn't have a great close, but opened within the wick, but not a great close on this Friday either. But it is holding above the 10-day simple. DKNG, nice move on this Tuesday here. Not a great close to the week, but holding above the 10-day simple as well. Snap we discussed already. FIGS we discussed as well. PLTR recovered as well. Bumble wasn't able to break through the anchor VWAP on this day or this day as well, but you have very high volume with a good closing range. So we'll have to see if this opens within the wick next week and then manages to push out through these levels, which have been resistance so far. AMD we talked about already. Crowd as well. SQ we covered. So you can see tried to break out here above this high and this one as well, then completely reversed and formed a bearish outside day and basically ended poorly and basically ended at the lows of the week. Cook also pretty negative action below the short-term moving averages. I believe this was on earnings. And lastly, we've got Coin, which also wasn't able to overcome the anchor VWAP from the IPO day. So overall, pretty decent action, especially considering the action of the overall indexes. And we do have some winners here. Affirm, Dash, BNTX, ABNB are kind of moving against the current at this point. And moving on to sentiment, let's start with my sentiment surveys on Twitter. We had a decrease in bullishness from 44.7% all the way down to 26.6%, which is very significant. But this is very correlated with the action on Friday, and we basically finished at the lows of the day. So this result really makes sense to me. Looking at the NAAIM exposure index, we had a decrease from 93 to 84, which is an improvement. But from a contrarian standpoint, I would like to see this drop all the way to 70, even 60. That would be ideal to really see fear come back in to the market. Looking at the put-call ratio, this is increasing, but still not quite at these levels, which marked kind of the turnaround points from the recent pullbacks on the S&P 500. And look at the bulls versus bears poll. This is increasing slightly, although it's pretty close to these lows since the March correction. Now moving on to the IBD Big Picture article, the headline is Stock Market Extends Its Slow Descent. These signs point to a weakening market. So they discuss the poor action from the overall indexes, how the Nasdaq had its fourth distribution day, and overall they discuss the Dow, which is also below its 50-day, some stocks, MRVI, which plunged 12%, S also experiencing some weakness, MNDY as well, DVAX as well, and UPST. However, you do have some leaders that are bucking the overall trend. So CELH and Task are ones to watch and have on your RS list. Crocs as well, as we saw, and they discuss some further action here, including the jobs report. So overall, their current view is a confirmed uptrend with 4 distribution days on the S&P 500 and 4 on the Nasdaq. And you've got some leaders up in volume and some down in volume as well. So lastly, we've got the GMI Signal from richardlmoglen.com, and this is still green since May 26. And the overall GMI score was a strong 6 out of 6 on this Thursday. So overall, taking everything into account, my current view is an uptrend under pressure. We are seeing some distribution pick up on leading names as well as the indexes. And it really comes down to what happens next week, whether we hold those key levels like the 21 EMA on the Nasdaq, as well as the 21 EMAs on many leading names, about whether we continue on with an uptrend or if we start some type of correction. But we were pretty extended on many leaders, and we are seeing some kind of natural pullbacks. And what remains to be seen is whether those pullbacks are something more serious or whether we just rally from here at this point. But as I said before, we don't have to predict what's going to happen. All we have to do is react to what's actually going on our screens and manage risk along the way. So with that said, let me know your thoughts on this market down below, and subscribe if you're new to the channel, and also leave a like down below if you enjoyed my analysis. And I'll see you guys in future videos. Thanks.